At the UN, the Palestinian Authority formally submits a draft resolution calling for peace between Israel and the Palestinians within 1 year and an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank by the end of 2017. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, Hamas holds the largest military drill since this summer's Operation Protective Edge. Russia President Vladimir Putin claims the West wants to chain and bear as he warns economic recovery could take 2 years. But meanwhile, the ruble continues to slide. The fight against the Boko Haram terror group, Cameroon's army reports its forces have killed 116 Boko Haram militants when attacking a base in the far north region of the country.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. In the name of the Palestinian Authority, Jordan formally submitted to the United Nations Security Council a draft resolution calling for peace between Israel and the Palestinians within 1 year and an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank by the end of 2017. The proposal outlines a Palestinian state by the 1967 lines. The Israeli foreign minister slammed the decision by saying it is better that the UN Security Council deal with more important matters of global security and not waste time on the gimmicks of the Palestinians. While the Israeli prime minister said the move would lead to a Hamas takeover of the West Bank. Also, in the last 24 hours in Gaza, Hamas held the largest military drill since the end of Operation Protective Edge, which shows once again that on one side, the east of Israel, the Palestinian Authority is continuing with its policy of nonviolence to achieve its goals, while in the Gaza Strip, Hamas is preparing for the next round of violence. Before we will start discussing this matter, let's take a look back.
قدمنا مشروع قرار لمجلس الأمن إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لدولة فلسطين قبل نهاية 2017.
It seems that too many in Europe, on whose soil 6 million Jews were slaughtered, have learned nothing. But we in Israel, we've learned.
Allahu Akbar.
This is totally unacceptable, and we hope that they will vote against it in the UN. And of course, we expect an American veto.
So when Europeans say that they're frustrated, we say, join the club.
And with me here in the studio, senior Middle East analyst for I-24 News, Abavi Sakharov. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And also Dr. Ghassan Abdallah, Director of Center for Applied Research in Education. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. Gentlemen, let's start by understanding why this is so bad for Israel, that the Palestinians are doing some diplomatic moves.
Right now, Lucy, I think we're in a big show. The show is presented by the Palestinian Authority, by the State of Israel, and partially by Hamas. Meaning, first of all, the Palestinian Authority, yes, it did presented a draft to the UN Security Council, but we're not going for a vote. Meaning that we have time, we still have time. On the other side, we see the Israeli side saying this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, but everyone knows that still the Palestinians, at least till now, they don't have 9 votes. And even if they will have 9 votes, then the Americans will put the veto on it, meaning that nothing real on the ground will come out of the Security Council.
So why to do it?
Why doing it? I think that the public opinion matters, especially after the death of Ziad Abu Ain, the Palestinian minister Ziad Abu Ain, during the demonstration last week. I think that President Abbas felt that he needed to do something. He needed to do some kind of a measure against Israel, whether it was to hold the security coordination, and we discussed this here last week, or to approach the UN. I think that he chose the other option, meaning not to go to an escalation against Israel, but to go to some kind of a diplomatic confrontation, not more than that.
And still have the, let's say, security.
And still, yes, the security coordination continues.
Yes.
Well, I think I disagree with such underestimation to the qualitative step taken by the Palestinian Authority, and just would like to remind you that this is the third qualitative step taken by the PLO and now by the Palestinian National Authority. The first qualitative step was in 1974 when Arafat declared his commitment to peace negotiations, and the second qualitative step was in 1988 when the PLO announced the establishment of a Palestinian independent state side by side to the Israeli state. And this third qualitative step is another call to prove that the Palestinian Authority and the PLO is totally committed to the international conventions and to the international calls, such as the partition plan 242 and 338 decisions.
But let's face the truth. We know the Americans are going to
I'm continuing.
veto.
If you allow me, I'm continuing.
I will allow, yes.
We know in advance that no Security Council's decisions will bring to us a Palestinian state on plate, silver plate or golden plate. We know that the U.S. very possible to use the veto against us. We know that. The U.S. is always biased to the Israeli state. But by taking such decision, and if you take into consideration the international wake up now, the European Parliament decision, other European countries, other South American countries who recognized the Palestinian state, this shows that there is a serious wake up in the international community.
But we understand that the Palestinian community is totally waking up or maybe trying to pressure Israel in one way or another, but let's face reality. What is happening on the ground is more of a diplomatic statements like what Avi said, and more of let's put it like that. If the Palestinians really wanted to start handling what is happening on the ground, why not to stop Hamas from doing a big drill in the Gaza Strip, or start rebuilding the Gaza Strip, or start helping the Palestinians, or sector and sector?
Excuse me to remind you and my cousin that Israel was born by an international decision from the United Nations and from the Security Council. This is number one. Number two, despite what Israel was doing against Gaza, the Palestinian Authority accepted to take 9 months experiment of new negotiations with Israel, and nothing came out from these negotiations. The issue is not that the Palestinian Authority controls Hamas or not. The Palestinian Authority, it's not. The Palestinian Authority, you know it. You just said to me that you work in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority does not even control the areas A in the West Bank, because the Israeli occupation is not allowing the PA to do that.
I don't think that we disagree here. What I'm asking here is two questions. Why, if the Palestinian Authority decided to present the UN draft resolution, so why not going for a vote? This is A, if they were so serious about that. B, how will all this move, all this operation going to affect the life of the average Palestinian in the West Bank? And I think
gradually it will affect. I can assure you, gradually it will affect.
Maybe, in a couple of years, but I think that in the immediate response, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be there. And I think that even the public opinion that partially is going to support this move, going to the UN, going to the Security Council, at the end of the day, if in a couple of months nothing will happen, will ask itself the question of, why did we do this move?
So what do you think that they should have done instead of going and just putting a paper out there?
I'm going to sound here a little bit more Palestinians than the Palestinian Authority, but if they were serious about that, they would have gone for a vote. The fact is that they didn't want to go for a vote because they understood that they're going to fail over there. They don't have 9 votes right now as we speak. They don't have 9 votes. So this is the time to negotiate. This is the time to discuss with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Arab League, and the international community like the European Union and the United States, how to make here a kind of a draft that they will have more than 9 votes.
Okay.
We are totally sure that we will.
Dr. Abdullah, I will give you the opportunity to speak. I just want to go for a small break. More on the last 24 hours in the Palestinian arena in Eli Hohenberg's report.
Only hours after the wave of pro-Palestinian votes in European institutions and after threatening to do so many times in the past, Jordan has submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council on behalf of the Palestinians on ending what it defines as Israel's occupation of Palestinian lands captured in 1967.
This assures the two-state solution, which should be on the 1967 borders, and Jerusalem is the capital for the two states, with East Jerusalem as the capital for the state of Palestine.
The Israeli response was interesting, as Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman first described the bid as a Palestinian gimmick and then called on the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table.
We hope that Palestinians will be ready to come back to the table to negotiate our relations, and only during negotiations it's possible to achieve a comprehensive solution.
Discussions on the draft could take weeks, and it still remains to be seen if the U.S. will use its Security Council veto to foil the move. In the Gaza Strip, meanwhile, Hamas held its biggest military exercise since the end of the 50-day war in the summer. Since an Egyptian broker ceasefire ended Operation Protective Edge, Hamas has often test-fired rockets into the Mediterranean Sea, suggesting it is making efforts to rearm. Separately, Palestinian sources reported that a member of Hamas's military wing was killed and 4 others were injured in an explosion in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip on Thursday. According to the reports, the explosion was likely due to a work accident while assembling a bomb.
You wanted to answer?
Yes. First, I'd like to tell you, you are saying that the Palestinians should go for voting. Yes, we know in advance that the United States will not vote with us, okay? And they will not give us their blessings. The United States is looking just for conflict management. They are not looking for conflict resolution. This is we are totally aware of. Secondly, this step, in my opinion, proves to the world that we, the Palestinians, are totally committed to peace negotiations. And second thing is that the Palestinian Authority and the PLO is not cheating the Palestinians. We are straightforward with the Palestinians. This is the tool that we have now. This is what we can do now, and we are not going to escalate violence in the West Bank. On the contrary, look at the Israeli officials. What do they say? The Palestinians should come back to negotiations. Who stopped? Who's the reason, the cause behind the failure of these negotiations?
So let's put into this equation the Egyptians. Okay, joining us from Cairo is Egyptian columnist Ali Salim, who wrote a column this week on the Arab world's relationship with Israel and Hamas. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Salim, let's just make out there what you wrote this week, because for our viewers who didn't read your column, you put an interesting, let's say, equation for the relationship between Israel and Hamas.
Let me explain myself. Hamas is not the legal representatives of the Palestinians. The Palestinians in Ramallah, the PLO, the current government, but Hamas, I think, can't negotiate and having the right to negotiate. They are just a clan, a party, but they are not representing the Palestinian nation.
Although, like you said, they're not representing the Palestinian nation, but they are controlling one big part of the Palestinian nation. They are controlling the Gaza Strip. So in one way or another, they see themselves as, let's say, a really realistic partner or realistic, let's say, governor for the entity for the Palestinians.
Yes, so far, they are as you are describing them, but this situation, I think, will be changed by pressures even from the Ramallah, pressures from the Arab countries. But I think they turned the Palestinians to be two nations, and this is very bad because they cannot join to a negotiation, and they are.
What you're saying is that they cannot join the negotiation because you see them as something bad for the Palestinians. They are not doing good to the Palestinians. Egypt doesn't see them as a partner.
It's bad for Palestinians. Hamas has its charter, and they didn't change it. They didn't believe.
Yes.
The only way to get a Palestinian state is to negotiate. That I want to say.
Okay. Mr. Ali Salim, thank you very much for this. Just let me explain just that the column that he wrote is basically saying that in one way or another, Hamas is the enemy for the Palestinians. They are preferring to see some kind of an understanding between Israel and the Palestinians in Ramallah or the Fatah movement than to see Hamas as some kind of a partner in this process. It seems that even the Egyptians are not agreeing with Hamas being part of anything at all.
Let us be very accurate in this field. Okay? What my brother is trying to say is that Hamas will not get into negotiations with Israel because of its political charter. Okay? But I'm afraid he does not know that there are secret talks between Hamas and Israel.
No, they know because the Egyptians are in the middle of the table.
Secondly, Hamas has announced it 3 years ago by Khalid Mash'al and Ahmed Yusuf that they are with the establishment of a Palestinian state in the territories of 1967, and they are entitling Abu Mazen to go ahead with the negotiations with the Israeli.
But it's nice that they are entitling Abu Mazen.
This is what Khalid Mash'al said to Abu Mazen. When he met him in Qatar, in Doha, he said to him, go ahead and we are with you.
Yes, but we are with you in one way.
He tried to do everything possible to undermine Abbas and to bring down the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And still we see that, by the way.
I think Abbas now is in a very good, strong position. Abbas is being supported and backed by the Palestinians and the Arab countries.
Let me just ask Avi if it's true. Is Mahmoud Abbas in a really good situation? Because if we remember after Operation Protective Edge, he was not in such a good situation in the West Bank, neither, maybe better in the Gaza Strip because the people in the Gaza Strip were so fed up with what is happening there.
Look, I think that Abbas is in a problem. He didn't approach the UN for no reason. I think that he understands that he needs to do something, and the different options that he has in front of him are not that good. He has to choose between the bad and the worst, meaning reconciliation with Hamas is over. We don't see reconciliation. I think that the so-called unity government is not really functioning in Gaza. Hamas is doing everything possible not to let the PA operate in Gaza. More than that, just today, for the very first time for years, we had seen hundreds of Fatah members demonstrating against whom? Against Mahmoud Abbas. In Gaza, supporters of Muhammad Dahlan, meaning Hamas allowed Dahlan supporters. Yes, Hamas allowed Dahlan supporters to go on the streets to demonstrate in favor of Dahlan and against Mahmoud Abbas, meaning there's a kind of a rare coalition here between Hamas and Dahlan supporters in Gaza Strip in order to bring down Mahmoud Abbas.
How come?
Dahlan hates Abbas. Abbas hates Dahlan. Hamas hates Abbas. You know, the enemy of my friend.
And Hamas used to hate Dahlan.
Of course.
And Dahlan used to hate Hamas.
Yes.
And this is politics.
This is completely
politics. You know, politics always dirty.
Yes.
What I'm trying to understand, alongside with this demonstration that you just told us about the Fatah members demonstrating against Mahmoud Abbas, we're seeing this big drill that Hamas is doing. What are they trying to show? They just yesterday were in one way or another out of a list of a terror group. So what are they doing exactly?
Look, I think that, if we look bottom line, it's not only Abbas who's in trouble or relatively trouble. It's also Hamas. Hamas is in trouble also in Gaza Strip. When you have tens of thousands of people with no houses, there's no reconstruction of houses in Gaza Strip. Well, partially, yes. 9,200 owners of houses got their cement in order to rebuild their houses. But we're talking about 108,000 owners of houses that still needs to rebuild their houses. So we're talking about a drop in a big sea of huge demolition, huge parts of Gaza that are completely demolished. And this is why Hamas is in trouble. We have 43% of unemployment in Gaza. This is trouble for Hamas. They don't have money. They don't have reconstruction. They have nothing to show to their people except for, then again, we're doing drills, we're doing marches. We have 27th anniversary, and we promise you we're going to continue with the jihad against the Israelis.
And let me add to your information that the prominent figures of Hamas in the West Bank are still opposing the Hamas people in Gaza, the Hamas policy in Gaza. And several meetings were held in the West Bank between those prominent figures of Hamas with the Palestinian Authority, and some of them visited Mahmoud Abbas in his office and declared their opposition to Hamas policy in Gaza. So Hamas problem is not only in Gaza, but also it has its own problem here in the West Bank.
Even worse, I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree that Hamas's situation in the West Bank is much worse. You know, we hear tonight, our Prime Minister saying that if the Palestinian Authority will do this and that, Hamas will take over. This is not true. Hamas's situation today in the West Bank is the worst, I think, in the history of Hamas, or let's say at least since 1994, since the foundation of the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is on the ropes. It doesn't have any kind of ability, not militarily speaking, not on the civil level, even in politics. Most of its leaders are today in the Israeli jails.
So
I think
what is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to do exactly? Again, threaten the world and say, okay, Hamas will control, Hamas will try to destroy and demolish.
Look, Netanyahu is in an election campaign. Yes, so he's trying to frighten the Israelis with the Holocaust. The Europeans forgot about the Holocaust. The Palestinians are about to take over. ISIS will take over. Hamas will take over. He's doing everything possible in order to really panic the Israelis, because I am Mr. Security, Benjamin Netanyahu. I will save you from the hands of ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, just name it.
And let me put it in other words. I think what Netanyahu is saying these days is part of his strategy, the strategy of fear. Investing in the strategy of fear to frighten the Israelis and the international community from the possibility that Hamas may take over in the West Bank. The same of what he is trying to do with Iran and with what he was trying to do in the past.
It was about Iran.
Exactly.
Now it's about Hamas.
So he's looking for a game, something to use.
You know, it's in one way or another, we can say that the Palestinians are also playing the game, but they're playing the same game that the Israelis are playing, and they learn it very good from the Israelis, if we can say. But today we asked the Israelis on the streets if they think the UN can play a positive role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's see what they had to say.
The UN has majority vote against Israel anyway, so what is the point of taking them in consideration?
Did an excellent thing here. I support them. Maybe the peace process will move forward.
The UN means nothing. That is what Ben Gurion used to say.
Whenever something important occurs, they run away from responsibility. They are an empty vessel.
I think they don't fully understand what's going on here, and they can't play a significant role because they don't understand the Middle East.
I will pass them. My feeling is that they are always against the Jewish state.
Let's try to understand, what is the Americans, where do the Americans stand right now?
In Cuba.
In Cuba.
In Cuba. Let's admit it. I mean, I think that the American focus is not here in the Middle East. In a way that they raised the white flag and said, okay, let's wait till the elections will end in Israel, then we will see. I think that everyone are now trying to do that. The Palestinians are in a kind of trouble, meaning if they won't do anything till March 17th, they're in trouble because their public opinion will attack them.
But it seems that also the Arab countries are not standing with the Palestinians and we're waiting for something else.
In a way they are, meaning they are supporting the Palestinians to approach, then again, the UN resolution. I'm not that sure that they will support to go now for a vote. And this is why we are waiting with the vote.
Kazan, it's not only the Palestinians who want to do something. I think that most of the international community is pushing the Palestinians to do something. Look, as I said to you before, what the Europeans are doing these days, what France was coordinating with Germany and Britain. This is one point. Second point, responding to what the Israelis just mentioned in the interviews, I think, and let me remind both of you, that Israel never paid attention to any decision taken by the Security Council or the United Nations. Look, there was a decision in the Security Council calling for the immediate cease of building settlements in the West Bank, and the U.S. did not use the veto. And Israel did not comply to this. So Israel, since 1948, do not
So what
pay
will promise
attention.
the Palestinians that Israel will do this time?
Sorry?
What will promise the Palestinians that Israel will do this
We
time
are
if
not,
they didn't keep
we are not believing any, one decigram that Israel will withdraw as a result of this decision. But we take this decision as part of the international support to the Palestinians. And this is a tool, maybe followed by another tool if Israel does not comply to the Security Council decisions. We know that Israel will not withdraw tomorrow morning. We know. And let me tell you, tomorrow morning you will hear new decisions by Netanyahu to confiscate more lands and to fatten other settlements and to build new units in these settlements.
And this is what's so interesting about that, because till now, even though the Palestinians presented their draft for the UN resolution, we didn't hear from the Israeli side any kind of punishment measures. Declarations, yes, but we hear these declarations from morning till night every day.
He was very
ridiculous. They didn't say we're going to take the money, the taxes of the Palestinian Authority. They didn't say we're going to confiscate lands or even to build more settlements. Meaning that even the Israelis are now in a kind of a waiting point, trying to wait and see what will happen with the PA.
But in the meantime, Benjamin Netanyahu continues to fright the Israelis with another front in the north, but we are not talking about that. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for coming for this part of the show. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and then we will be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. At the UN, the Palestinian Authority formally submits a draft resolution calling for peace between Israel and the Palestinians within 1 year and an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank by the end of 2017. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Hamas holds the largest military drill since this summer's Operation Protective Edge. President Vladimir Putin claims the West wants to chain the bear as he warns economic recovery could take 2 years meanwhile, the ruble continues to slide. The fight against the Boko Haram terror group, Cameroon's army reports its forces have killed 116 Boko Haram militants when attacking a base in the far north region of the country. Yes, welcome back. While Russia and Cuba rise to the top of the headlines, the fight against the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq continues. The general in command of U.S. forces taking part in the fight said today it will take a minimum of 3 years to reach a turning point against the terror group. Lieutenant General James Terry also said that along with continuing airstrikes, Kurdish forces have recaptured a large area in Iraq near the Syrian border. For months, the border town of Kobani has been a symbol of the fight with Kurdish Peshmerga forces, including Iraqi Quds forces, locked in a brutal battle with IS. Journalist Hermione G. just returned from several days spent inside Kobani, the key border town between Syria and Turkey that has been the site of an ongoing battle for control between IS and Syrian Kurdish fighters. She joins us right now from Brussels. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, good evening.
So, Hermione, first of all, good to see you back, and I believe it was really interesting being there because we've been talking a lot about what is happening in Kobani. What is happening right now in Kobani?
Well, they're still very much under siege. I mean, there's shooting, there's mortar strikes within the town, you know, throughout the day, constant. There are also, very importantly, there are many international coalition airstrikes that are taking place throughout the day. So it's still very much a war zone. It's a town under siege. But what's very interesting is I was there just in late September, just a couple of days before the airstrike started. And even though the fighting was much less intense at that point and several kilometers away from the town, people were terrified, they were desperate. But now, even though the fighting has come into the city, people are optimistic, they're almost cheerful because they have the support of the international community. They've been given additional weapons. They are feeling that they have the upper hand at this point. And people there are saying that they now control about 60% of the town. So they're feeling positive, although again, it's still a very, very difficult situation for the people there. And there are still thousands of civilians who are actually still living in the city. So under very, very difficult conditions.
You know, but when we are hearing today, U.S. generals saying that it will take 3 years to get any turning point with this terrorist group, how come they can be so positive?
I think because they are very united. I mean, what's astonishing, the thing that really struck me the most while I was there was how united the community is. And also importantly, I mean, these are the YPG fighters, these are the Kurdish guerrilla forces, and they feel that they're very much fighting for a cause. They're not simply fighting to save Kobani, although that's obviously the immediate goal. They're fighting for a sort of greater cause, obviously the Kurdish cause. And it's something that they very much believe in, and they see themselves as the sort of ideological opposite of the Islamic State militants. And so it's given people a real kind of sense of purpose. And again, very importantly, they are, at the moment, they have the upper hand, so that even though the battle might take, you know, several months more even just simply for Kobani, they feel that they are making ground.
Yes, Hermione G., some good news in a bad situation. Thank you very much, and good to see you in Brussels. Thank you. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira looks back at the history of relations between the United States and Cuba. We just talked about it just a short while ago, from Fidel Castro's rise in 1959 through the invasion on the Bay of Pigs and the missile crisis in the early 1960s until last night's dramatic mutual announcement to open a new chapter.
It was a long road for Cuba and the US until yesterday's mutual announcement to move forward toward normalization of ties. The two neighboring countries have been bitter enemies for more than half a century, and the tension between them once plunged the world to the brink of nuclear war. In 1959, communist leader Fidel Castro took power in Cuba after a 6-year-long guerrilla war. As a result, the US cut all ties with the small island only 150 kilometers from the coast of Florida. A few years later, in 1961, President John F. Kennedy tried to topple Castro's rule using Cuban exiles who had been trained by the CIA. The attempt known as the Bay of Pigs invasion failed dismally, but this was just a preview of what was to come. 1 year later, Cuba turned to its biggest ally, the Soviet Union, and Moscow deployed nuclear missiles on Cuban soil. Once the US discovered the missiles were there, the world held its breath for a nerve-wracking 13-day political and military standoff.
Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sights in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no.
US-Cuban relations went into deep freeze and stayed that way even when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, taking with it the Western Communist bloc, but not Cuba. Cuba instead became a neglected and isolated country, highly damaged by the American embargo imposed against it in 1960. After Fidel Castro left office and passed the leadership of Cuba to his brother Raúl, attempts to unfreeze the relations began to heat up.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba.
For many Americans and Cubans, this is a day of joy, but it may take time until the bad blood that flowed between the two nations will be cleared.
And now let's go back to the present. U.S. President Obama's decision to reverse policy on Cuba has drawn praise from world leaders, but amongst the people it affects, feelings are decidedly mixed. ABC News 1 Net has a look at the reaction on the street.
Screams erupting from a woman whose father was killed in Cuba. This is the last place you should be, she shouts at this man wearing an Obama t-shirt.
Because he's the president of his country now.
It's just the latest outrage coming from a community filled with anger.
Americans being murdered premeditatedly. It doesn't count.
4 other American families lost their loved ones in 1996 when Cuban fighters shot their planes down.
I am very hurt by the decision. I'm very hurt.
It's a slap in the face to my dad.
They're all stories that have fueled hours of protests.
I just don't agree.
Condemnation from the mayor. And cries of assassin, accomplice, and coward aimed at the president.
Obama, coward!
Crowding the streets of Little Havana, prompting police to keep the peace.
The worst president that we have in this country for many years.
But even here tonight, there's also the silent cry of acceptance.
I'm just glad it's happening now.
Well, nothing's happened in 50 years, so nobody's moved anywhere. Any change at this point will be good.
Change that's coming too late for some. My father was shot, she screams. My mother couldn't even get to the body. Memories and tensions that fill the air here tonight.
Yes, with the economic crisis and the currency collapse sending shockwaves into the global economy, Russia President Vladimir Putin went in front of the cameras in an annual speech before the press. Uri Shapiro looks at Putin's effort to reassure the country on internal and global issues.
It's been a troubled time in Moscow in the last couple of days. Ever since the Russian ruble collapsed, the country teeters on the verge of financial disaster. But President Vladimir Putin does not sound concerned, telling all the crisis is only temporary.
The situation can last approximately, no one can say for sure, for 2 years. But not necessarily. The situation may improve earlier.
Putin gave a sharp statement at his annual news conference Tuesday and continued to stand by his foreign policy and to attack the US and the Western countries, accusing them of double standards.
US military bases are all over the world. And you want to say that we behave aggressively? Is there a common sense there?
The Russian central bank had to make a drastic interest rate move this week to block the loss of value of the ruble. It continues to fall, but according to the latest poll, Putin enjoys the support of 80% of the population, despite the situation.
Well, Putin is not a fool, and he will do something so that the situation of importing foreign goods and changes in prices will not be too bad because of the ruble. I think everything will be okay.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Thursday that the sanctions against Russia remain unavoidable. But on the bright side, for Putin, there's always love.
One friend of mine asked me, after all these events of the past year, listen, do you have a love in your life? I said, what do you mean? Well, do you love somebody? I said, yes. Well, he said, thank God for that, and downed a shot of vodka. everything is fine.
Yes, at least he has love in his life. And with me to understand what he has more than love is I-24 News correspondent there, Sami Abu Diab in Crimea. Good evening, good to see you back.
Good evening, Lucy.
Yes, we miss you, although you are on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us. So, Sami, let's try to understand. What were the central message from Putin's speech today to the Russians?
Yes, Lucy, sure. Putin, he have 3 messages to the people in his speech. In his every year he do a speech like this, but in this speech, a special speech, he include in his speech 3 messages. 1 message from the people inside Russia he said to the people to be sure that the government will protect the people, will protect the economy of Russia, and he going to grow in the inside economic to be safely. Even he talking about 2 years of crisis, but all the issues that the government of Russia is making on the ground is to protect the currency, to protect the economy of Russia. And the second message is for the international community that Russia, it's not an enemy for anybody in the world, but Russia, it's going to support and to protect the issues of the government. And he said that also in his speech that Russia pays the cost of remaining a nation, a civilization, and a state. And the third message is to the Ukrainian people that Putin and the Russian people is standing behind the brothers, the Ukrainian people, to solve the problem by the peace issues, by the peace process, to don't fail in a civilian war in Ukraine.
Yeah, we can say that in one way or another, he was really calm for a person that is facing a lot of problems. Sami Abu Diab, we miss you over here. Thank you very much for this. And to understand more about the economic aspects, and now for a look more on the economic side of Russia's currency crisis, with me is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Good to see you back. So, Lionel, relatively calm, I have to say, we see him.
Yeah, actually, the main message of President Putin was optimistic about the outlook of the Russian economy. Mainly 2 things. He admitted that international sanctions dragged down the currency by 25 to 30% of the ruble. And second of all, he admitted also that the economy of Russia was not enough diversified for the past 20 years.
So what is the current situation right now?
Current situation doesn't look that bad. The central bank managed to stabilize the exchange rate. Today it's 60 ruble for a dollar. Basically, the increased interest rate from to 17% at the beginning of the year was 5.5%. But they also, since December, put $10 billion in foreign reserve to buy, rubles to increase the currency.
Some people will say that in one way or another, this is a normal situation for a big country, that it will suffer some kind of a crisis. Is it normal?
It is normal, but what is not normal is actually the decrease in price of oil coming from $120 6 months ago to $60. And basically, Russia's revenue from the state is coming 50% from the oil industry. The economy is not diversified, and the issue is there.
Yes, definitely, Lionel Friedfeld. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose.
Local officials and residents in Nigeria claim the Boko Haram terror group kidnapped some 185 women and children this week and killed 32 in the northeast of the country. Among those fighting, the group is Cameroon's army, which reportedly killed 116 Boko Haram militants on Wednesday. Ayman Siksik has the story.
Another dramatic development in Central Africa Thursday. The Cameroon army said its forces had killed 116 Nigerian Boko Haram fighters in the far north. 1 day earlier, insurgents from the Islamist group attacked an army base on the border with Nigeria. But Cameroonian soldiers fought them off, killing over 100 of them, the Cameroon Defense Ministry claimed. According to the army, the Boko Haram fighters destroyed a pickup and a troop truck and managed to capture another military truck. Cameroon and Nigeria are linked by a bridge, and Boko Haram has grown in power in the area. Militants had carried out repeated massacres of civilians and attacked villages in the region. Recently, they've begun attacking military targets as well. Also Thursday, Boko Haram militants reportedly killed at least 32 people and kidnapped many more, including women and children, in an attack on a village in the northeast of Nigeria. On Wednesday, a Nigerian court sentenced 54 of the country's soldiers to death for mutiny after they refused to deploy for an operation against Boko Haram. The soldiers said a lack of weapons and equipment put them at a dangerous disadvantage against Boko Haram. The sentence only highlights the urgency with which Nigeria views the Boko Haram threat and the need to blunt it.
63-year-old Dr. Ben Carson, a retired neurosurgeon and potential Republican candidate for president in 2016, is on his first trip to Israel, reportedly to better understand relationships in the Middle East. I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari joined him in the trip to the Holy Land.
With slightly more than 2 years left of President Barack Obama's last term in office, the race to replace him has in effect begun. Amongst Republicans who are eager to win back the White House, Dr. Ben Carson is one of the first to have thrown his hat in the ring after forming his own political action committee last August. A member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as well as a respected neurosurgeon, Dr. Carson has emerged as a leading voice on social and political issues in American conservative circles, with a speech at the 2013 National Prayer Breakfast drawing media attention. He is in Israel this week, which in recent years has become a popular destination for American political candidates.
Israelis should not have to live endangered in their homes and schools.
Israel is our strongest ally in this region, and they should understand that. They should know that we're their strongest ally. They shouldn't be wondering and scratching their heads.
Other prospective candidates have perhaps generated more media interest, but Carson is optimistic.
It's not really a matter of how I see my chances. It's a matter of how the American people see my chances. And we will allow the people to then make a choice.
A former independent, he recently joined the Republican Party and has some criticism for the Obama administration's handling of its relationship with Israel.
I've talked to a number of Israelis since I've been here. I haven't found anybody who thought that the relationship was solid and that it was good. They felt neglected and pushed to the side. Would definitely like to reestablish the strength in that relationship.
Carson toured Jerusalem's Hadassah Medical Center on Thursday. Earlier this week, he visited the West Bank, where even Republican administrations have criticized Israeli settlement building. But Carson seems accepting of an Israeli presence there.
We don't want to do things that would jeopardize Israel by putting the enemies in a position where they have access to large portions of the Israeli population with relatively short-range missiles.
As a leading African-American conservative, Carson has a unique perspective on the state of race relations in the U.S. under President Obama.
There hasn't been a lot of race relationship improvements recently, and I think the community needs to recognize that you cannot, put people who are thugs and involved in thuggish behavior on a pedestal.
While Carson is not among the favorites at the moment, the last Republican primary season featured starring roles for some even more surprising candidates. Time will tell what the future has in store for Ben Carson.
I hope he knows that one visit is not enough to understand the Middle East. And now, does the European Parliament's vote on recognizing a Palestinian state mean the Europe-Israel relationship is on the wrong track? In the final report in the series, I-24 News correspondent Eli Ochenberg takes a look to the future, to the horizon of the relations.
We go on with the resolution proposal on the recognition of the Palestinian statehood.
We witnessed staggering examples of European hypocrisy.
I think it's extremely frustrating for all of us. We have so many burning issues to work on, but unfortunately, the wind that is blowing from Brussels right now wants to focus on 3 issues only: settlements, settlements, and settlements.
Frustration is indeed a key word when it comes to the Israeli-European relationship, but maybe a better description would be lack of communication or mutual misunderstandings.
There is a misperception of Israel in many parts of Europe. It is also important to give the Israeli public the true perception of Europe, because this is also, I think, a mirror view.
So we need to start talking with Europeans and also trying to promote a better understanding of where we stand on this. Because honestly, our government hasn't been doing too well.
But it's not all so dark. Even the complex decision to recognize a Palestinian state can be interpreted positively for Israel.
Usually the Israeli political discourse emphasizes that a recognition of Palestine is some kind of a huge defeat or a proclamation against Israel. But if you actually look at it, it has also positive aspects for Israeli democracy, because it serves as an indirect or even a direct recognition of Israel itself.
But it's not only the conflict. Though it may seem the gaps between Israeli and European values are wide, the mutual interest and challenges are only growing.
I think that there is a change in the European perception. I see it in the recent results of the European election. I'm not sure they like us so much, but I think it's because of they understand that we have a kind of like a common enemy, the radical Islam.
This is the government of France.
And looking at the bigger picture, the future may be even brighter.
We prefer to work through positive incentives. As you know, the EU is Israel's #1 trading partner.
We are looking into the future. We think that we should look beyond this or that declaration.
Yes, the next series is just right in the oven. Sony Pictures has canceled the release of a comedy on the fictional assassination of North Korea's leader in what appears to be an unprecedented victory for Pyongyang. More on the movie that moved a threat from the virtual world to the physical one in a report by Shahal Peled.
A storm of criticism hit Hollywood as dozens of stars lashed out at Sony's decision to cancel the release of the controversial comedy and anti-North Korean satire, The Interview. A sad day for creative expression, tweeted comedy actor Steve Carell, followed by Ben Stiller, who wrote, "Really hard to believe this is the response to a threat to freedom of expression here in America," and comedian and host Jimmy Kimmel, who went as far as saying it was an un-American act of cowardice that validates terrorist actions and sets a terrifying precedent. Most concerns were attributed to the indeed unprecedented act taken by Sony Pictures and its effect on future satire films. In a statement released Wednesday, Sony announced their reasons.
In light of the decision by the majority of our exhibitors not to show the film The Interview, we have decided not to move forward with the planned December 25th theatrical release.
When the threat moved from the virtual world to the physical world, that's when the dominoes started to fall.
Meanwhile, U.S. officials have determined that North Korea was indeed behind the cyber attack on Sony Pictures. Hackers who claimed responsibility for seizing control and leaking data from Sony's computers last month warned people Tuesday to stay away from cinemas showing The Interview. The threat also affects other Hollywood studios, with movies slated to come out over Christmas.
Christmas is traditionally a very peak season for moviegoers, and if people feel unsafe because of the perceived threat to one of the films that are being shown, it could really affect everybody's habits.
On this kind of decision, you must say the phrase, "Are you kidding me?" Out of sports. And with me now is football analyst Yoav Borovitz. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
Good to have you back in the studio. So blow my mind with soccer in Morocco.
Soccer in Morocco, yeah. The whole world is looking at Morocco now because they're hosting the World Cup finals for clubs. We all know the World Cup final for national teams, but there is also a World Cup final for clubs. And we're talking two of the greatest clubs in the world, Real Madrid representing Europe and San Lorenzo from Buenos Aires representing Argentina and South America. And Lucy, this is a very exciting match because they're competing for a very lucrative title. But if we're talking money, or if we're talking, quality.
Oh, we're always talking money and quality.
Yeah, eventually it gets there.
Of course.
But sometimes quality doesn't equal money, because look at this case. Real Madrid is worth like hundreds of millions of euros every year. They pay their players. San Lorenzo hardly pays them 10 million euros a year. So Real Madrid is so much richer, and they're also favorites. But San Lorenzo, with their unknown players from Argentina, but they have the excitement, the technical ability, a lot of support. It's going to be a very exciting match, and there's just a lot of prestige also in this game.
And now let's go to Germany.
Let's move to Germany.
Yes.
Very interesting story. One of the greatest German players of our last few years is Marco Reus, a magician on the pitch. He's the star of Borussia Dortmund. Now, Marco Reus is also considered to be a model citizen, a great musician. He plays the guitar beautifully. Really a guy who has it all, the talent, the looks, everything. He also loves beautiful cars.
He bakes?
So, excuse me?
He bakes?
We should ask him that. He might also be doing that. But one thing he did not do is drive his car with a driving license. We just found out that Marco Reus, 25 years old, for the last 7 years, drove his lucrative cars without any license. And this is just something the Germans cannot believe, because he was considered to be such a positive guy, and now he's going to pay and fine $670,000, 540,000 euros, because the German system is you pay for your 3 months of salary.
Maybe
if
he
you
was
drove.
born with
Yeah, he's a good driver, but he has no salary. Moving to another interesting and important.
No.
Don't have time. Next
don't
time.
Have time. We don't have time. You have Volvic. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for this. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and then we will be back. They just shouted in my ear.